King Charles has never been this furious, not once in his entire reign. The silence, the cold rejection, the unprecedented actions that shocked the world. Harry and Meghan have crossed a line so personal, so unforgivable, that the king responded in ways no one could have predicted. Meghan Markle just made public accusations so devastating that the world still can't fully comprehend the scale of them. And Harry? He stood by her side, backing every word, making this betrayal even worse. But what happened next? What the world didn't expect was the fury of a father pushed to the brink. The moment that would change everything. The world was in shock in early 2026 when King Charles flew to Washington, D.C. and made a move that no one saw coming. In a city filled with power and politics, where diplomatic games are played daily, Charles made a silent statement that spoke volumes. He refused to see his son. Harry, just 40 minutes away, was within reach, yet Charles, with his full entourage and state itinerary, built an entire schedule that deliberately excluded his own flesh and blood. This was not a mere snub. This was a carefully orchestrated message to the world. Harry is no longer part of the royal family. He is just another private citizen, irrelevant to the monarchy he was once meant to represent. The press seized on the moment, stunned at the king's decision. But there was more to this silence, something much darker, far more personal, and rooted in a betrayal so deep it could not be ignored. The royal family has long held Remembrance Sunday as sacred. For Charles, this day was not just about tradition, it was personal. It was a day to honor the fallen soldiers, those who made the ultimate sacrifice. But in November 2025, Harry made a choice that would sever his bond with the royal family forever. While the entire UK observed a moment of somber remembrance, Harry was on the dance floor at a Hollywood party. A glittering event attended by the stars of the world, Adele, Beyoncé, Oprah, Kim Kardashian, at Jeff Bezos's estate. Amid the flashing cameras and clinking champagne glasses, Harry walked in wearing a poppy meant to honor the fallen soldiers, including those who fought beside him in Afghanistan. But the symbolism was lost on him. Harry, who had served as a helicopter pilot in one of the bloodiest zones of the Afghan war, stood there, holding his wife's hand, amidst the loud music and flashing lights, while the names of soldiers he had fought with were being read aloud in London. The backlash was immediate. A nation that had once called him their own felt betrayed. But it wasn't just the public. Behind closed doors, the royal family watched in disgust. A final attempt at reconciliation had been underway. Plans were being made to bring Harry and Charles together privately at Sandringham, away from the prying eyes of the press. But that party, the very one that celebrated excess while the nation mourned, killed any hope of that. Harry had made his choice. His true priorities were exposed. Months passed. In early 2026, as Charles sat in Washington, D.C., 40 minutes from his son, he chose silence. He had already made the decision long before. The palace's move wasn't about giving up, it was about Harry's actions speaking for him. The king wasn't just denying Harry access, he was reaffirming his loyalty to the crown, to the sacred traditions that Harry had so callously ignored. This wasn't a public rejection. This was Charles quietly taking a stand. The silence in Washington told the world everything they needed to know. The royal family had no place for Harry anymore. But while Charles remained silent, Meghan was anything but. The damage to her career was visible. Deals had started to fall apart. Projects were being shelved. And what did Meghan do? She pointed the finger at the one person who could not speak for himself, King Charles. In a public statement that shocked even her critics, Meghan claimed that her failing Netflix projects and canceled deals were all due to her efforts to protect the royal families. Reputation. She had been holding back her career, she said, to prevent upsetting the king. The world, however, saw through her words. The timing couldn't have been worse. Meghan's brand had been built on breaking free from the palace's strictures. Now, to suddenly claim she had been sacrificing for the crown's sake, it was too much. The receipts didn't lie. In 2022, the world watched as Meghan and Harry unveiled a new documentary. But behind the glamorous fade, there was a darker side. They used private family messages, phone calls, and behind-the-scenes moments that the royal family had never consented to be filmed. And while the world ate it up, they were quietly tearing apart the royal family's carefully constructed image. Yet now, suddenly, Meghan's concern for royal decorum seemed like a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. But Meghan's attempts at control were too late. The damage had already been done. In the documentary, she revealed intimate details of family discussions, including private conversations about her son Archie's potential skin color and security concerns. These accusations hit the world like a bombshell and were never retracted, leaving a permanent stain on the royal family's image. And then there was the revelation of Meghan's darkest moment. In her interview with Oprah, Meghan admitted she was at a breaking point, grappling with suicidal thoughts. But the palace's response, denying her help, was even darker. They looked at a woman who had said she didn't want to live anymore and turned their backs on her. But even worse, the truth about Meghan's hypocrisy started to unravel. In her 2021 Oprah interview, Meghan had claimed that she and Harry held a private wedding ceremony before the public one, a claim so easily debunked by the Archbishop himself, who officiated the royal wedding. That lie would haunt Meghan's credibility for years, making her a figure of ridicule in Hollywood, where her brand of truth quickly became suspect. Meghan's actions, both inside and outside the palace, had created a pattern of betrayal. She blamed the royal family for everything, from her miscarriage to the loss of her career. But behind it all, one thing was clear: the royal family was no longer the target. Meghan was now targeting the one person who had the power to control it all, King Charles III. The collapse of Meghan's career became undeniable in 2026. She had been dropped by WME, the most powerful talent agency in Hollywood, after just 2 years. Her demands had pushed even the most seasoned professionals beyond their limits. And when she demanded that her agents cancel Thanksgiving plans for her crisis, it was the final straw. Even those who had defended her were repulsed by her hypocrisy. The once mighty Sussex brand was now a joke in the industry. Deals that had once been promised to her were now being pulled away. The glittering projects that had been teased by Netflix and Spotify were slowly rotting, with nothing to show for it. In a bitter turn of irony, Harry and Meghan, the self-proclaimed defenders of privacy and children's rights, became the very thing they once fought against. By spring of 2026, desperation had set in, and the facade began to crack. Harry, who had spent years campaigning for his children's protection, began dismantling the very walls he had so carefully built. The reality hit harder than any headline could. The money had run out. On April 5th, 2026, Meghan posted an Easter video on Instagram that sent shockwaves through the public. A simple family moment, Archie and Lilibet racing through the garden on an egg hunt. But the footage was anything but ordinary. The critics pounced, dissecting every frame. The children, barely 2 years apart in age, appeared almost identical in height. Lilibet, barefoot in what looked like summer, while Archie, wearing a jacket suited for winter, seemed out of place in the same shot. But it wasn't the clothing or the inconsistencies in the clips that got people talking. It was something far more haunting. Where were the other children? The cousins, the friends, the extended family? All that could be seen in the video were 2 small children running alone in an enormous estate, with only their mother following them at a distance, camera in hand. The comments poured in, each more devastating than the last. "The loneliest children I've ever seen," one wrote. "Why is she filming instead of holding her child's hand?" The stark, painful contrast between Meghan's children, isolated in their vast estate, and the royal children surrounded by family, was impossible to ignore. While the Sussexes paraded their children in front of cameras, the world was waking up to a cold truth. Harry had spent years fighting to keep his children away from the public eye. He argued in courts, made speeches, and built his identity around protecting his kids from the media's destructive gaze. Yet, by 2026, the desperate financial situation forced Harry to open that very door. The wall was gone, brick by brick, and now the children were the ones being used to keep the lifestyle afloat. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in London, something far more sinister and quiet was unfolding. The palace had found its replacement, and it didn't make headlines. There was no public drama, no grand announcement. The monarchy, with its calculated silence, had already moved on, and Harry was no longer needed. In February 2021, Harry and Meghan had relinquished all royal patronages. Organizations that had long carried Harry's name were handed off to new patrons without ceremony. His military titles, the ones that had made him respected by soldiers and service members, were stripped away and redistributed. His name disappeared from state occasion programs, from royal documents, from everything that defined him as a member of the working monarchy. Harry's space had been filled, and nobody even noticed the vacuum until it was too late. But then came April 2026, and with it, the 100th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's birth. Harry's absence was barely noted, and when it was a line in a report. There was no mourning, no regret, just a passing mention that moved on without him. For years, Harry had believed that his absence would eventually create a gap, one the palace could no longer ignore. He believed that the shrinking monarchy would come crawling back to him, realizing they needed him more than they wanted to admit. But that illusion shattered the moment a young man walked into the room, James Alexander Philip Theo Mountbatten-Windsor, the Earl of Wessex. At just 18, James had already done what Harry had failed to do. He had quietly earned his place. Unlike Harry, James was raised not with the assumption that the world owed him anything, but with the understanding that he would have to earn his position, day by day. He hadn't been thrust into the spotlight with Netflix deals or press campaigns. Instead, he'd been quietly doing the work, attending the funeral vigil for Queen Elizabeth, showing up for the coronation, attending the Easter service at St. George's Chapel, all without a camera crew trailing behind him. James's entrance into royal duties without the drama, without the spectacle, and without the need for media attention sent a brutal message to Harry. This was a young royal who was willing to do the work, without making it about himself. Where Harry and Meghan had turned the royal family into a circus, James was quietly stepping in, performing his duties without complaint, and without the need for a production company to capture it. The palace's plan, insiders called it, was a doctrine of continuity. James was everything Harry and Meghan had tried to fake. While the Sussexes tried to build a brand out of grievance, the palace had found a young royal who simply did the work, showed up when needed, and stayed out of the spotlight when he wasn't. The monarchy wasn't mourning Harry's departure, it was moving forward, quietly and efficiently. Public opinion in the UK began to shift as well. Support for the monarchy reached its highest point since the Queen's death. Tabloids that had once built entire narratives around the Sussexes' drama now found themselves abandoning those stories. The public was moving on, and it was clear the Sussex brand had lost its appeal. The media that once thrived on their scandalous stories now saw no need to cover them anymore. The palace had made its move. The royal family wasn't punishing Harry. It wasn't chasing him. It was simply moving on, and Harry's leverage, once so strong, had evaporated the moment James stepped into the void. Harry and Meghan had spent years constructing an empire built on grievances, press wars, and media manipulations. They had built a narrative around themselves, and for a while, the world had watched. But now, the palace had moved on. The space Harry thought was his, it was filled without fanfare, without controversy, without the need for a grand announcement. Harry had been replaced, and not by anyone famous or flashy, but by someone who simply showed up, worked, and did what was expected. James's quiet performance had proven to the world, and more importantly, to the palace, that the monarchy didn't need Harry. The institution had found someone who embodied the ideals it cherished, without the media frenzy, without the drama, and without the bitterness. And that, more than anything, was the final, irrevocable blow to the Sussex brand. The monarchy had done what no media campaign could ever do. It had moved forward, found someone new, and made the one judgment no court ruling could ever undo. The Sussexes were no longer relevant.